text. All right. If you have your Bible, just go to Matthew chapter 24. That's where we're going to start today. Matthew chapter 24. I think over the past 13 years, 14, well, no, wait, I got it 2011. Oh, in June. So how long have I been out here? 2011, 14 years? This month. Okay. I think the past 14 years since I've been out here, the lighting in this building has gotten worse, and the text in this book has gotten smaller. I don't understand what y'all are doing out here, but you're really messing me up. So, all right. Well, we've been looking at the resurrection, that is our resurrection, the coming resurrection. And just quickly, we breezed through this, trying to keep that high view of it. I told you that's the way it was going to be when we started. And we have answered questions like, who is it for? Well, it's for everyone. When will it be? Well, when Jesus returns. And that depends on what you think about it, as far as what you believe. What is the resurrection? It's that thing that started when Christ saved us and will terminate when our bodies are risen from the grave. We've answered all these sort of high-level questions. Now we're going to start the final question. The question that is probably the first one on all of our minds when we think about our coming resurrection, and that is this. What will it be like? What will the resurrection be like? It's natural that would be our main focus. We can understand like when it's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and all these things, how it's going to happen. But see, it's the actual experience of going through it that's going to directly affect us personally. It's what we'll feel and what we'll see, things we'll hear, right? And so it's natural that our first question should be, or probably is, what's it going to be like when I'm raised from the dead? And does the Bible say anything about that? When I was a kid, one time, probably before I was 10, I don't remember exactly, I was pretty young. My dad came in one day after work and announced, everybody pack your things, we're going on a trip. Now this was very unusual for us. We never went anywhere. I joke, we used to go to Beaumont once a year, and that was on income tax day. So we never did anything like this very often. When I got older, we did that. And I asked, of course, where are we going? And he said, I'm not going to tell you. All I'm going to tell you is we're taking you to an island out in the ocean. I was like, what? I mean, I couldn't even hardly imagine something like that. So naturally, I was very excited. We all were, and even very nervous, never having experienced anything like that. And I had a million questions for him. And he would only give me vague answers, trying to keep the surprise. By the way, we went to Galveston, so he technically wasn't wrong. But for a kid that had never been anywhere, it was quite an experience, as you can imagine. And that's what most of us are like, aren't we? When we're about to experience something completely brand new, unimaginable, or sort of a life-changing event, we want to know, well, what can I expect? What's it going to be like? If you're about to have a big surgery, or maybe take a trip somewhere in the world you've never been, or experience a trauma is coming up, maybe a new job or a big move, we all start doing the same thing, don't we? When something's going to happen that's going to affect us and maybe change us forever, we all start getting on our phone and trying to read about it. Or maybe watching videos or asking friends who've had similar experiences. What's it going to be like? Well, there is a lot of good news. Where our resurrection is concerned, the Bible has a great deal to say about what you can expect to experience. It talks a lot about what it's going to be like. And that question is the one we're going to start trying to answer today. When I am raised from the dead, what can I expect to experience? What is it going to be like? Number one, here in Matthew 24, is I will say this. It will begin very suddenly. Okay? It will begin very, very suddenly. And we see that in Matthew chapter 24. We're going to take up our reading in verse 36, read down through verse 44, talk about this a bit. It will begin very suddenly. In Matthew 24, Jesus says, beginning in verse 36, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. And 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming, but you know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Now, if the first thought was, well, this is talking about the return of Jesus, not the resurrection, I would remind you, we've already seen in our study, that's when the resurrection will occur. So what applies here to his coming naturally applies to your resurrection. And the first thing that we learn here is it will begin suddenly. The resurrection will begin very suddenly. This passage we're in, that we just read, is part of a longer sermon called the Olivet Discourses, Matthew 24 and 25. The sermon is 2 chapters long. And Jesus preached this sermon because he was prompted by something his disciples said. If you go back to the very first verses, they said, when are these things going to come to pass that you mentioned in chapter 23? And when's the kingdom going to start? And when are you coming back? And this sermon was to answer those questions. All right? One of the things we see in the passage we read is that there's a warning about the suddenness of it, the unexpectedness of it. Look in verse 36. Of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. He warns us in verse 44, you should also be ready because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. In other words, he says, my return is going to be very suddenly. And it's going to be very unexpected. At least for some people. In fact, the illustration he uses, the one of Noah, is a fantastic illustration of the suddenness and the unexpectedness of the beginning of our resurrection. He says in verse 38, just like it was in the days of Noah before the flood, people were eating and drinking and getting married until the day Noah went into the ark and shut the door. He says down, he uses a good illustration, verse 40 and 41, you have people at work, and one's going to be taken by this thing, and the other one's going to be left. Right? So there's what he has here is he has this picture of the world just sort of living its life, right? And then all of a sudden, the Son of Man appears. All of a sudden, the Son of Man appears. One of the debates that sort of goes on in Christianity and has for years is the Bible seems to teach 2 different things about this. It repeatedly talks about Jesus coming as being sudden and unexpected, but at the same time it gives us tons of signs as to when it's going to happen. In fact, if you read the Revelation in a literal historical interpretation, which by the way you should do, you see a lot of things leading up to Christ's return. It seems like you could almost probably pinpoint the very day. And so which one of these are true? Is he going to come suddenly and unexpectedly? Or is he going to come after several signs that we can easily pick out? The answer is both, depending on who you are. And that's a very important distinction to make. Which is true? How do you reconcile these? Well, I'll give you a good example. People who often talk about or believe in a pre-tribulational rapture, we've already kind of discussed this, said, well, there'll be 2 comings. There'll be this one sudden, secret, unexpected coming, and then later there'll be the second coming, and that's how they reconcile it. But there's actually a much more pointed explanation than that. The key is in verse 38 and 39. He says, as in the days of Noah before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, till the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood come and took them all away. You notice there he's talking about a very specific group of people? Let me ask you this. Was Noah expecting the flood? There you go. Right? For 120 years he's building a boat. While he tries to convince the rest of them it's going to start raining. And he chose to ignore him and kept doing what? Eating and drinking and going to work and getting married and having kids and living as if nothing was ever going to change. That gives us a clue in regard to this sudden unexpectedness of our resurrection. Noah wasn't surprised. And that's the warning of verse 44. Therefore you, as opposed to them, also be ready, like Noah was. For the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. The suddenness of the resurrection and the unexpectedness of our resurrection is reserved for people who aren't prepared for it. But it doesn't mean it won't be sudden. Keep your places there, and let's go back to 1 Thessalonians. And we'll probably, I don't know if we'll get further than this today, but it's okay if we don't. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, I want to show you something very interesting. When the Bible talks about the return of Christ, the beginning of our resurrection being sudden, that is a message reserved for a sort of a specific group of people. We're going to see that group in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. The resurrection will begin suddenly. It will begin suddenly. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, look at what Paul says beginning in verse 2. He here is also going to distinguish between two groups of people, and as we're reading this, I want you to try to catch that. You'll see that there's two different groups he's talking about in the same passage. He says, you yourselves, okay, that's us. You know perfectly that the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night. For when they, see the distinction? You, them, when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon who? Them. As labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. That sounds really similar to what Jesus was saying back then, right? They were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the day Noah walked into the ark. Same sort of idea here. Verse 4. But you, and here's where I sort of want to draw the net on this. But you, brethren, are not like them. Those are my words. You are not in darkness so that the day should overtake you as a thief. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. So what are Paul and Jesus both saying here? The resurrection will take most of the world by complete surprise. They weren't expecting it. Even though they've been told for 2,000 years the dead are going to be raised, they're going to carry on with their lives as if nothing was ever going to happen. And the day that Christ shows up and bodies come out of the graves, they will act like they've never heard anything like this before in their lives. And they were not prepared for it. So the resurrection is going to begin suddenly. Suddenly. We're still in 1 Thessalonians. Look backwards a bit in chapter 4, one verse, verse 16. I want to show you sort of an alarming aspect of the suddenness of it that I think is really neat. 1 Thessalonians 4:16, when he's talking about the resurrection, the appearance of Christ, he says, the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Right? So there he's talking about the resurrection. Look at that interesting detail that reflects the suddenness of our resurrection. You've got the world around us who aren't giving it a thought. Eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage and going to work. And then all of a sudden, somewhere over here in the east, at least from our perspective in Thicket, somewhere over here in the east, Christ appears. Suddenly, unexpectedly. And there's a loud, powerful shout, a noise unlike any ever heard in human history. The sound of a trumpet and the voice of the archangel, and then all of a sudden, the dead rise from their graves. Suddenly. A shout and a call so startling that it literally wakes the dead. As all of the righteous dead of all of the ages suddenly hear Christ's command to come and rise. And so our resurrection will begin very suddenly. Very suddenly. In fact, those of us who aren't Christians will be absolutely surprised by it should you be alive when it happens. The rest of the world is not expecting it. We have been warned repeatedly, keep an eye out, because you brothers aren't like them. You know this is going to happen. You ought to be waiting on it. And there's for good reason. We'll cover that in a week or two. So first of all, your resurrection is going to start very suddenly. Very, very suddenly. And when it starts, it's going to happen very, very quickly. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It's going to start suddenly, but it's going to happen quickly. It's going to happen quickly, and we see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. In fact, it's going to happen so quickly, other than the fact that we are going to sort of wake up, change, you will not likely know that it happened until it happens. Look at what Paul says about how quickly the resurrection will take place. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 51 and 52, he says this, beginning verse 51. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep. That is, everybody's not going to die. But we will all be changed. Now look at what he says in verse 52. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead in Christ will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Notice the first thing he says here is, look, I'm going to explain a mystery. A mystery. And what does he mean by that in verse 51? Well, you'll see that word sometimes in the New Testament, mystery, and Paul will be the one that uses it, and he says, I'm going to explain a mystery. A mystery is something in the Bible that no one knew before. In other words, most of the stuff we have in the New Testament, actually the idea of it or the basis of it, right, or the shadow of it kind of already was in the Old Testament. And here comes Christ, and he makes this full revelation, and the apostles write. A mystery is something that was completely unknown until the apostles received it. The mystery here was this. He says what in verse 51? We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. Everyone believed, or at least all the Jews, that there was going to be a resurrection. They knew all the dead would be raised. But there was something nobody knew. What about people who aren't dead? What's going to happen to them? We know Christ is going to appear and the dead are going to rise. But what if you haven't died? What's God going to do? That was a mystery. They didn't know what was going to happen. And so what he says here is, I'm going to explain a mystery to you. What's going to happen is we won't all die, but we will all be changed. And so if you've died, you'll be raised from the grave. And if you're still alive when Christ appears, you're not going to die. You're going to go from this to that, so that nobody's going to be left out. That's the mystery he was trying to explain. But look at what he says in verse 52 as to the sort of process of this thing, right? In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we will be changed. Not only will the resurrection begin very suddenly, it's going to take place instantly. He says this will happen in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. He uses two terms there to try to describe how quickly you're going to go from this to that. All right? The first term he uses there is he says it will happen in a moment. That's the Greek word atomos. You probably think in the word atom. That's sort of where it comes from. A very small particle, right? That word atomos basically means something you can't. It's something that is so small you can't cut it into pieces. Okay? Something that is so small it can't be divided because it can't even be measured. You know, sometimes we'll use the term like, well, we'll do this and it'll just take a split second. Well, a moment is faster than that because a second can be split. What Paul says here is the time that it will take to change you from alive to alive, right? From dead to alive. He said it will happen so quickly that it is a period of time which you can't even measure, and therefore you can't divide it into a period of time. It's an unimaginable speed at which this will take place. He piles on another term there in verse 52, in the twinkling of an eye. In the twinkling of an eye, it's a phrase that sort of made its way into our modern culture even. In the blink of an eye, we say things will happen. That word twinkling is the Greek word hripe, and it means like a rapid movement, like a jerk. Anybody in here ever be sitting there and your eye just twitch? How fast does that happen? Boom. Paul says that's how quickly it's going to happen. This change, this resurrection will take place so quick that it's instantaneous, that you will not even be able to measure the time in which it happens. So when Christ appears very suddenly and unexpectedly, at least to the rest of the world, We are going to literally instantly go from this to that. From dead to alive, or from alive to eternal, whatever the case may be. Instantly. All right? The resurrection, don't from now on, as you imagine it as a Christian, don't imagine it like the end of Ghostbusters, where all these things are just floating right while the world is being destroyed. That's not how it's going to happen. Nor is it going to happen like The Walking Dead, where a hand comes up from under the ground, starts digging its way out. That's not what's going to happen to us. This will be in an instant, a moment of undefinable time, in the twinkling of an eye. And imagine the impact of this thing on any given normal day, being fully involved in any given normal thing we involve ourselves in. One moment you're maybe sitting there in your chair having coffee and reading the Bible, or you're on the middle of a phone call, or you're doing some other thing, who knows what, and then all of a sudden you are glorified in God's presence eternally forever. That quickly. Almost without even being aware of what happened if you didn't know what had happened. So the resurrection will begin very suddenly, and it will happen very instantly. Christ is going to appear, and there's suddenly going to be this tremendous call of power, and we are going to go instantly from this to that, from one reality to another. The resurrection begins suddenly, and it will happen instantly. And I have 2 more points, but we're out of time. So we will pick those up, Lord's will, next week, and try to finish up this thought. How will the resurrection take place? What's it going to be like? Well, it's going to begin so suddenly, nobody expects it. And it's going to happen so quickly that if you didn't know what was happening, you wouldn't even know what has happened. And those are comforting, beautiful thoughts. And to me, it's no wonder that Paul says tonight to the Thessalonians, brothers, comfort each other with these words. Because I said, sometimes we're going to experience, this life event where we're wondering a lot about it. We're upset. We're nervous. What's it going to be like? How's it going to feel? Right? Well, the Bible's already told you where your resurrection is concerned. There's nothing but positive things to say about it. Christ will appear suddenly. We will be changed instantly. That ought to be a great source of comfort to every single one of us. It's intended to be. That's why God told us so much about it. He wanted us to know. Let's have a word of prayer. We'll be dismissed. Lord's will, we'll finish this up next week. Father,